I happened across a video on social media of two British Muslims talking about their perspectives on British society and what it means to be a Muslim to them in British society. And this video gave me a cacophony of emotions. It kind of upset me, it scared me, but it also hurt me. And I'm an American sitting here in America, but it also hurt me. And I'll explain why in a second. Look at this video from the two people speaking.
Our hatred for the non-Muslims doesn't stop us from being unjust to them. My argument would be it also doesn't stop us from coexisting with them, living in a society with them.
But I can be in a land where I live with these people, but I have hate for them. I don't like them. I say that is, at the time that we're living in today, is very, very hard to claim that. Imposing onto you, saying that you have to accept the British values. And Muslims are being put in situations where they're asked, are you a Muslim first or are you a British first?
Yeah, but these are easy questions to answer. I'm a Muslim first. Like, what's the issue?
But that's you not being loyal to the country that you claim to be from. You see, that's what Muslims are now. By saying that statement, you're a foreigner from us now.
So as you see there, they mention that they can coexist with people they don't like, and that they can still be just. He said unjust, but I think he actually meant just towards people as well, that are the other, that are not in their group, that are not quote unquote Muslims. And of course, this was met with a bunch of controversy, a bunch of backlash, people justifiably upset and angry. And my initial response to this was that this is the kind of rhetoric that destroys civilizations, no matter who it comes from, no matter what group is saying this. If any group in a society, especially if they are a group in a society that is foreign to the society, and they are coming into the society, and they have not assimilated, and they are saying this is exactly the kind of rhetoric that tears down the social bonds needed to maintain a peaceable social order. That was my first impression. But then my second impression was that this is largely the fault of multiculturalism. This is largely the fault of the ideology that tries to say that the minority culture is inherently victimized, oppressed, and aggrieved, and the majority culture is inherently oppressive and evil and assimilationist, which has been made into a bad word by academic linguistic wizards that have managed to turn virtue into vice by turn of phrase, by rhetorical manipulation and other kinds of obfuscation, and then implant that into the minds of the masses to get them to go along with policies that may not actually be good or virtuous in the first place. That's also part of what's going on here as well. And then as I continue to think of the civilizational impacts of this kind of thing, it brought me to my home right here in America. Because Britain, unlike America, is a culture that is based on a different set of beliefs and principles than American culture is. Britain was a sort of construct of the old world. I'm not trying to say this as an insult. This is a fact in terms of geography. Old world Europe, America is a relatively new invention. Britain's been around for hundreds of years, been around for a very long time. It's an ancient society with ancient traditions going all the way back hundreds of years, going back to King John in 1215, going even further back than that, going all the way back to the days of Gaul and Britannica and the Celts and all of that. All of that defines, for a British person, at least for a British person that understands their history, and I'll discuss that in a second, what it actually means to be British. Whereas in America, the definition of what it means to be an American is much more open-ended, because the American emphasis is not necessarily on a long, extensive history. We're a country that's only 270 years old. Nor is it on a set of institutions or traditions or practices that universally define Americanism. It's rather on a set of principles, a set of axioms that bind us together as Americans and put us in the same intellectual tradition as our founders were in, and inform us on how to move forward in the future in a way that is just, that is rational, and that also is uniquely best for political order and for social flourishing. That's ultimately what America is about, but that's a very different set of goods. But that set of goods is open to being exploited by people that don't appreciate our country, and people that may not necessarily believe that set of goods is good at all, but they may believe that their ways and their values are better than no set of goods. Before I continue, allow me to specify what I'm trying to say here. I am not trying to say implicitly or in a hidden way that immigrants are bad. I'm not trying to do that. I know that some people, here's the problem, a lot of people have confirmation bias, and they will immediately consider their own premises when they hear certain words or certain phrases, because it'll trigger dialogues and sentences in their mind, which then convince them of an argument the presenter never made, and then makes them angry. I can't control your mind or your brain. I can't control anything but my own words, which is why I am saying I am not attacking immigrants per se. Let me say this. I am not attacking Muslims. I don't attack individuals. I look at ideas. I'm sure there are many, I know there are many nice Muslims, many nice immigrants that exist in the world. And I believe as an individualist that we ought to judge people on the basis of their own values, character, merits, and excellence. But I also believe on a civilizational level, we have to make sure those values, that character, and that excellence conforms to our society so that in the process of assimilation, people that come in enrich our society as opposed to bringing it down by not wanting to play by the same rules that every other American or every other Briton or whatever else has to play by. And that is the fundamental problem here, my friends. The problem is far too many people in both America and also in Britain and across Europe don't really have a yardstick, a framework by which to understand what are correct and right cultural desires, don't really understand how to evaluate or measure the progress of those who come into the country and demand assimilation, because they are so disconnected from their own culture that they themselves are not even assimilated into it. What am I saying? I'm saying there are native-born citizens of both countries that are not even assimilated into their culture and only have a very disconnected idea of what it means to be a citizen of their own nation. And if enough of those people begin adopting mindsets that don't conform to the health and well-being of their culture or nation, and rather conform to the health and well-being of the globe or other nations, not only will their disconnection to their country now become dangerous and lethal as translated into policy, the health of their own country will necessarily falter for that very reason. And it opens the door for people to be manipulated in their heart when it comes to what they believe about people of other cultures, native-born, non-native-born, in their own countries. The truth is this, my friends. You should not be expected to simply sit down and smile when your neighbor says, as those two podcasters did, that I don't like you. And even though I don't like you, I can still coexist with you. Well, you're not obligated to like me. But on a societal level, you not liking me is going to obviously cause issues if you translate that opinion over to others, and if that influences how you see the broader society. Because you may not be violent, you may not be hurtful, you may not do anything that is outwardly immoral, but you may work in some way or another to change our culture by discarding it, by not wanting to be a part of the broader society, by not wanting to be a part of the general cohesive unit, and instead wanting to create your own micro-society in defiance of the general society, which then if it grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, threatens the general society. Then in all reality, the country you came to, or the country that you live in, is no longer the country that it's traditionally been. It's a country that is now changed, all because we have forgotten what it actually means to be a citizen of that country. We've forgotten the merits and the values of that nation, and we've decided to sacrifice them over to other ideas simply because we don't have the connection to them anymore. This is a threat that is being seen in France, where the north of France has basically been totally and utterly changed, despite the fact that Macron himself and many people in France were incessantly warning about the fact that it's okay, let's take in some migrants, but let's not take in everybody. Let's be smart with it. Macron was initially of that mind, but then he was convinced by people in his sphere that was evil and xenophobic, so he let more people in, and then consequences came. He didn't care about the French culture. He didn't care about assimilation. He simply cared about France being this open area for any and everyone to come in. The similar policies that happened across Europe. And in America, similar mentalities, I don't care about the policies. Similar mentalities have become tangible in the minds of our leaders and in our cultural institutions. Americans these days are told that they are intolerant or xenophobic if they have a suspicion to having any outside culture, forget Muslims, any outside culture that does not want to assimilate to our culture come into our country. It could be Sweden. It could be the Danish. It could be any outside culture. Americans are called xenophobic for not wanting to have that happen automatically. Americans are called xenophobic, and they're called Christian nationalists. They are slandered as Christian nationalists, so to speak, because they have an admiration for their nation. They believe in having borders, and they also believe that the nation state requires certain things to be maintained. And the first of those things is a loyalty to your own citizens over the citizens of other countries. Many Americans are slandered as evil nationalists for believing this basic fact of political order, that without which there is no political order because the state collapses, then society follows suit. So on and so forth. So I began speculating on the causes of these things. And I've arrived at 3 conclusions through my research that I think explain quite neatly why we are so eager to host our haters in the West, and why we are blunted on a cultural level, on a moral level, on a philosophical level, from rectifying this issue through sound thinking and then pursuing policy and pursuing other means of non-governmental action through that sound thinking as well to increase assimilation and increase unity in the society, and therefore make the society better for everybody within it. That's been stopped by certain phenomena. The first phenomenon, and I've been harping on this for a long time, is a lack of moral education. Oftentimes, when you hear the issue of multiculturalism or minority cultures presented in a society, it will almost always be presented as a moral issue. In America, the motto of the Declaration of the Statue of Liberty is often cited. Give me your huddled masses, your poor. That is oftentimes cited as Americans having a moral obligation to let anyone and everyone at any time come into the nation. And if they don't do it, they are defying their own ethos. Throughout Europe, at the beginning of a lot of the migrant crises, the language of compassion was used to encourage countries like Germany and others to take in a lot of migrants, even at, forget any ideological concern, forget any social concern, even at the risk of the capacity of their own resources. They were encouraged just to forget about all of that and focus on helping the migrants who those same countries actually caused to lose their homes, because many of those same countries, as a part of the NATO military bloc, facilitated the bombings of the Middle East, which actually caused the migrant crisis to come up in the first place. But let's not talk about that. Let's not go there, okay? And so, when you don't have a sound grounding in moral philosophy, when your morality is floating up in the air, like castles in the air, that's just a construct of the mind, 2 things can happen. You will oftentimes, by necessity, not be able to make the best decision relating to the health of yourself as a human being and your fellow people in society. Because what is ethics? Ethics is simply this process of deciding what is right and wrong and applying it to practical action. Well, you can't really have that if you're not educated on those concepts quite well. But also, and this is more insidious, the second danger is that your inherent human benevolence that all of us have within our heart, it's a principle of our nature. That inherent human benevolence can be abused and used by people who are not benevolent, but who wish to sick certain political agendas upon you by pulling at your heartstrings, suspending your reason, and then getting policy passed on that basis. On many issues, beyond this issue, this happens. In fact, this is one of the driving forces of political action in the West today. It's also one of the driving forces of mediocre thinking. The fact that the American people were convinced into believing that Ukraine was the biggest of their concerns, despite the fact that we have a lot of concerns here at home, was not simply because the American people are uninformed or anything like that. I don't think that's the case. It's because the American people were told by the establishment class that what happens in Ukraine ultimately affects us here at home. And in our globalized economy, that makes sense. But what didn't quite make sense when all was said and done was the amount of interest that we put into Ukraine over the past 20 to 30 years that artificially made it a responsibility for America, and then therefore made it an illegitimate responsibility for America, not one that we have by necessity, but one that we have by custom, poor custom, might I add, and then that gets us into a boondoggle where our obligations are messed up and conflated and tied up. And then money goes and all kind of other things happen. We have inflation and all kind of things happen because we've launched our economy into a death spiral to fight against the so-called evil Russians. That is an example of the heartstrings being used as a political mechanism over the sound doctrine of reason and first principles and moral philosophy. And it can only happen when a people have a lack of moral education, or when their leaders have a lack of moral education. I think the same thing is true also in Britain. I think the same thing is true. A lot of people in the West in general can't really tell you what morality means or what ethics means if you ask them. Many people will simply say, well, it's all subjective. Relativism. Relativism has been the death knell of modern culture as well. That is concerning for a healthy society and a political order, and that is going to have consequences that relate directly to the quality of the people that enter the society, because society can only be maintained by people that have the right values. But if those values are weakened or non-existent, then anyone of any caliber can enter the society, remain there, and flourish there in their own way, even if their values contradict the society. But the main problem, I think, and this is one that we have to really tie down on, the main problem is a lot of people in the West are not connected to their history, to their past, or to their country. This is one of the bigger issues. It's very easy for someone whose idea of their country, even if they're born into it, whose idea of their country is shaped through the education systems of the government, or shaped through detached historical narratives, not to actually see those things beyond anything more than superficial words on paper or superficial ideas floating in the sky. People who have a stake in their country, people who have a stake in the preservation of their country, people who appreciate their country on the ground level, like many older generations tend to, because they've been through more than many younger generations have, in their own way at least. Those are the people that tend to have a better appreciation of their nation, even if that appreciation may also be colored with their own version of mythology and fantasy. Yes, the boomers have their own versions of mythologies and fantasies. I'm not someone who's sitting here and trying to be an apologist for the older generations. Of course, I understand the criticisms, but I'm saying, when you in London experienced the Blitz and saw German planes flying over your city and reducing it to smithereens and bombing Buckingham Palace, you have a very different notion of your country than if you're a 19-year-old marching down the streets of London, paved and everything, high quality life and everything, shouting, "Destroy the fascist," or shouting whatever other epithet is given to you by your leftist friends. If you are an American who saw us go through a world war, who saw us overcome 9/11, forget World War, 9/11, I was 1 year old when that happened, your appreciation of the country is going to be different than if you're someone being inculcated in some random university down the street that tells you that America is inherently evil and oppressive at its inception, that 1619, not 1776, is the true cultural origin of America, and therefore everything about America is bad, that assimilation to American values is inherently oppressive, and that America is just this terrible imperialistic force, well, you're going to have a different appreciation. People that live in the same country, that touch the same ground, can have two different conceptions of what that country means, and that is a beauty of human dynamism, and that's great that we can have that ability, but it's not great that that kind of disconnectedness remains a force in shaping the perspectives of the society. I'm not saying it comes all the way down to lived experience. No. But I am saying that if you're going to appreciate your country and guard your country from influences that may seek to transform it, or that may simply seek to reject some of its fundamental values on the offset, that may simply seek not to foster goodwill amongst men, then you have to be connected. You have to have skin in the game on an intellectual level, on a personal level. You can't just know America or know Britain through what your education system tells you. Because the education system itself is rife with a flaw that modern day education doesn't teach you about the concrete, solid ground of things, except if you're in some specialized course on welding. It rather teaches you about the abstract ideas and theories and all these things that are out there, disconnected from the common sense of reality, so that when people think of education, they think of theorizing. But when you think of the classroom, where education takes place, that's more interesting. Because in the classroom where the theorizing happens, you may have friend groups that talk about things amongst themselves. You may have a certain kind of pedagogy the teacher has to teach the kids certain things. You may have different quirks or different things that happen in the classroom that draw students there. Classrooms are like micro-societies. And education, how it is taught today, is like the theory of society that is entertained in the mind, but is never quite reached. A lot of people interact with their own nations like a theory and not like a reality. This is the truth, my friends. The answer is not hatred. The answer is not any of these things. The answer, rather, is to gain an appreciation of your country by working from moral premises, by putting a stake in your country, in terms of having a stake in your country that puts you liable for its success or for its failure, and by guarding your heart from those who may seek to use it for their own gain. The West needs to ask itself, are we going to continue to think through these issues in a smart way? Or rather, are we going to begin looking through these issues in a smart way? Or are we going to excuse contempt and hatred and lack of goodwill in the name of tolerance, when tolerance, understood properly, has nothing to do with accepting the intolerant? It has everything to do with ensuring both the tolerant and the intolerant can walk on the same grounds together, and yet the tolerant remain the dominant standard of the society, and the intolerant remain a fringe position. That's what the tolerant society has to do. But none of this is being talked about, because there's a hopelessness across the West in terms of how people even see their own countries. And that's a problem. And that hopelessness, I think, will continue to translate into societies being infused with lesser values, and those lesser values impacting the health of these nations. But this can be changed. It'll take some time, but it can be changed. It can be changed first and foremost by simply dedicating yourself to learning, to loving your country, having a love of country, and most importantly, having a connection with your nation. Those three things on an individual level may not fix the problem entirely, but it's a great start, and it's a hell of a lot better than nothing. My friends, love you guys so much. If you love me, like, share, subscribe, everything. Do whatever you can so you can support this channel. Be sure to donate to me on Patreon, PayPal, all that good stuff. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.